Hello everyone, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I've always been aware that night is another world, a time when the world exhales and the unspoken pile up on the edge of our vision. I never gave it much consideration until I began working. It began as a means to cover student loans and weather the strangulation economy of a town that punished the living. The opportunity arrived quietly. An overnight security job at a data storage facility on the edge of town, 20 miles from the next sign of life. Concrete, remote, and surrounded by nothing but empty fields and discarded telephone poles that slumped like the backs of dying men. The building itself was a lump of quiet. No markings, no windows. It stood like an abandoned mausoleum by time, a thing not to be touched or tampered with. I should have listened to that reflex. Desperation overrode better sense, though. My work was simple. Monitor the interior camera screens, make 3 rounds per hour around the building, and record any discrepancies. That word, anomalies, it had a clinical, antiseptic flavor that lingered. I interpreted it as burglaries, technical issues, or perhaps the stray animal wandering too near. But anomalies, I would discover, are more subtle than those prosaic explanations. My work schedule began at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m., and on my first night I was told by a gruff-looking older man named Cooper, who came in. He spoke sparingly, didn't make eye contact, and wore a serious stiffness around the shoulders as if anticipating something to jump. When I questioned safety on the job, that's all he would say. Don't listen for the sounds. Don't linger near the cameras. And if you find anyone inside after midnight, you didn't. I ignored his words as absurd nonsense. Perhaps a quirky sense of humor. Perhaps the fatigue of a man too long tied to loneliness. By the first week, I had committed to memory every creaking beam and dead-eyed bulb in the building. The building was arranged like a square. 4 long corridors that met in the center where my security station resided behind a glass wall. Each corridor extended into endless rows of data storage units. Black metal shelving stacked with servers, cables, and blue bulbs flashing coldly. And then the noises began. At first they were subtle, the occasional click of a switch, the faint rattle in the distance sounding like an out-of-place tool. I checked each of them thoroughly in my rounds, flashlight gripped, calm heart. Nothing. I wrote it off as settling of the building or atmospheric electrical hum off the servers. They grew. By week 3, the sounds had a texture to them, cautious, calculated, as if actions were being taken just on the border of my field of vision, always just around the corner, always just out of the range of the flickering surveillance cameras that provided their protection at the very instance they were needed most. One night, just after 2:17 a.m., I heard the unmistakable pattern of breathing. It was far away, hardly audible. A wheezy breath, a shallow puff, slow, wheezy, wet. I was frozen in the middle of the east corridor, the thin beam of my flashlight slicing through blackness like a surgeon's knife. The sound was coming from upstairs. I aimed the light upward, but there was nothing to look at. Only smooth concrete and closed-up air vents blanketed with industrial mesh. I stood there, paralyzed until the breathing ceased. This is when I knew the cameras were not malfunctioning. They were dodging. The frames would register a freeze as something passed by. Not a person. Something. A shadow that did not align with my patrol path. A blur that suggested movement, but when rewinding the footage was nothing, erased, like nothing occurred. By the end of the first month, I had stopped day sleeping. My nights rang with the hum of electricity and the pulse of red LED lights. I started to hallucinate on my rounds, or at least I thought I did. Faces leaped from server racks, mouths opened in wall grain. And in one terror-filled moment, I'm sure the corridor behind me breathed, walls that inhaled and exhaled as though the building had lungs. I said nothing. Maybe it was pride or fear. But most likely, it was the sense that saying it out loud would grant it permission to rise, to grow. And rise it did. It was 3:11 a.m. on a Thursday that I gazed at it brightly for the very first time. I returned to the security station after a patrol. The monitors, 11 screens which were each split into 4 quadrants, stood there softly alight with their soft, flickering feeds. All was peaceful, until all was not peaceful. In aisle 4 of the hallway, between 8 and 9, stood something. Not a man. It was ever so slightly off measure, too tall, its body too thin. It stood without movement, head tilted ever so slightly towards the ceiling. I inched further forward, peering hard at the screen, my heart hammering, and it turned. Not hesitantly, not as though any human compassion had been considered. It brought its head in line with the camera with automatic suddenness. Though the photograph was grainy, I was able to glimpse the absence of features. Smooth, pulled-out skin where there should have been eyes, and a mouth, and a nose. My vision flashed to darkness for a second. My windpipe closed down. I was unable to blink. The cam feed distorted, flashed, and came back again, the hall vacant. I searched the building. I did so not out of duty, but because of some compulsion, something low and foolish. There was nothing. Nothing even of a disturbance. But I knew it had been there. I knew it knew that I had seen it. From that evening on, the figure was more prominent. Perpetually in one place, always upright, standing, staring, nodding. Its head jerked into spasm-like spasms of twitching, as though to understand what it was being altered into. Its skin shone slick in the illy lit overhead bulbs like paper oiled through. The true horror, however, wasn't in the fact that it could be seen. It was in seeing it play by rules. It arrived punctually at 3:11 a.m. It disappeared at 3:33 a.m. And in between those hours, if I had to leave the security room, I would get proof. Open doors that I had closed before. Stacks of servers knocked like dominoes. And on one occasion, a single human tooth left right at the point of intersection at the center outside my glass wall. I understood what Cooper had been trying to convey. There were rules here, boundaries not human-made, but something ancient and infinitely more malevolent. The instant you embraced it, actually saw it, the clock began ticking. A bargain had been made, and the price was eternity. One evening, I returned to the complex after a fitful, nightmare-haunted sleep. My footsteps echoed too loudly. My badge took too long to scan at the front entrance for several minutes. And when I finally gained entry into the building, I noticed something which uncoiled all the nerves of my body. The clocks were all wrong. Both of them, analog and digital system logs inside, were frozen at 3:11 a.m. Regardless of what I did, how many times I rebooted the system, the building was resolute that it was 3:11. Even stepping outside, my phone clock got infected, freezing and not updating. I was trapped in that hour. The cameras then showed a number of figures, each more grotesque than the last. Their shapes bulbous, abnormal, jerking against the cold, fluorescent lighting. One crawled upside down on the ceiling. Another dragged itself along broken limbs, each movement prefaced by an ear-piercing static hum that filled all the corners of the facility. I could be seen on one of the screens. Not standing, sitting at the security desk, staring at the monitors, completely unaware, stiff as stone. I turned around in terror. The chair was empty. I turned back. The picture vanished. Reality was breaking apart. On my final night, or so I thought my final night, I found the basement. It wasn't on the building's blueprints. It didn't appear anywhere in system architecture or patrol records. And yet behind a plugged maintenance panel in Corridor 4, I found a narrow stairway leading down into darkness, musty and foul like moldy wires. I don't know why I went down. Perhaps it was because I knew no light would ever return, that I had been chosen or designated. The basement pulsed with low-end frequencies that pained my teeth. The ground was covered with stacks of yellowed, crinkled paper, employee files, printed mail, visitor logs. All the names were redlined through with heavy black strokes. All except mine. At the far end of the hall was a door, and on the other side of that door I could hear my own voice. Not screaming, not calling, reciting. Something. A set of numbers, repeated over and over, I never opened the door. I do not remember how I got back to the surface. Perhaps I did not. Perhaps whatever walks outside the facility today, whatever writes these words, is not the same thing that went in. I quit the following morning. There was no reply. My supervisor's email bounced. The company site was no longer around. The building itself, when I attempted to view it during daylight weeks later, had vanished. A patch of withered weeds was all that remained, untread and untired. But every night at precisely 3:11 a.m., I wake up in a cold sweat, my body still bound to that hour. Sometimes I see a glimpse of a faceless figure in the hallway outside my apartment. Tall, faceless, watching. Sometimes I hear the voice from the basement. Mine, but not. And I know the contract was never truly broken. The night is no longer secure, and the anomalies are always watching. There are locations on this planet where silence is not peaceful. Silence that is not a lack, but something in itself. Silence that is not soothing to the mind, but incites. I was at one such location once, and although it has been years now, even now I am still not sure if ever I actually escaped from that place. That fall of 2017 had marked when everything seemed to break in my life. I had then spent almost 10 years working with a leading architectural firm in Chicago. Deadlines, late evenings, caffeine and fluorescent lights had become my rhythm of life. Perhaps one thought exhaustion went hand in hand with hard work. But when my hands started shaking randomly, when my heart would start racing at the slightest suggestion of an email alert, I realized that something had changed, from tolerable stress to something more sinister. My third therapist of the year told me to get out of the city altogether. She described sensory cleansing, complete withdrawal into quiet and solitude. It would be a temporary escape, a reboot. She had a contact, a friend of a friend who owned a cabin in a far-out forest in upstate Michigan, near something called Dagger Ridge. One cabin in the woods, beyond the row of cell towers and highways. It was ridiculous at first, idealized the way loneliness sometimes is. But I consented. And so on a chilly October morning, I took only what was essential and drove 6 hours north into the unknown. The last mile of road turned to dirt and gravel. Trees stood on either side like sentries, bony and towering, their branches raking the gray sky above. Colder air seeped in with each footstep I made, and the forest seemed to thicken as if it were excluding me. Finally, I arrived at the cabin. It was smaller than I had imagined, made of worn wood and having a leaning roof that slanted ever so little in the middle. There was one chimney rising from one corner, twisted as a bent finger. No houses nearby, no driveways, no fences, just endless woods and an aloneness so dense you could feel it. The interior of the cabin was plain but acceptable. A wood burner, a small kitchen, one cot beside a cobwebbed window. The only contemporary luxury was a small generator that just about kept a few lights burning and a laptop charged if necessary. No signal, no TV, and no reception on the radio. I ought to have been in a state. But initially, I wasn't. In fact, the first night I slept more soundly than I had in months. But the tranquility, as I would come to realize, is only the lack of disturbance, not the presence of security. By the third day, there was a subtle shift that took hold. It started with sound, or rather the warping of it. I recall how the woods, that should have been filled with birdsong and leaves rustling, were strangely quiet. There were no bugs buzzing at dusk, no owls hooting at night. All one could hear was the creaking timber of the cabin itself, grumbling under its weight like an elderly man grumbling in slumber. I disregarded it. I told myself it was a matter of readjustment. The mind, after all, prefers to wreak havoc whenever it is deprived of what is routine. But the dreams followed. They started gently, shapes waving just beyond touch, a whisper calling my name from some hidden place I could not locate. But in the course of just a few nights, the visions intensified. I dreamed of the cabin overhead, suspended in darkness like a gangrenous tooth in an ocean of blackness. Something lingered, observed, had me under its gaze. I sensed it, even as I slept. I woke up one evening to the sound of footsteps creaking, slow, plodding, stepping on leaves outside the cabin. I remained motionless, eyes open in the dark, ears trying to distinguish reality from the last thread of dream. The footsteps circumnavigated the edge of the cabin, squelching dead leaves as it went. Once, twice, in a full circle, and then nothing. I sat for hours, still. When the sun finally broke above the treetops, I went outside, hoping to see some tracks in the ground. There was nothing, however. No tracks, no destroyed leaves, just thick quiet. On the 5th day, I found the journal. It had been concealed in a loose plank over by the stove, tied up in a moldy rag. The cover was cracked, the pages old and yellow and curled. Writing began in the early 1980s and was in intermittent, barely legible script. The writer never signed his name in ink. But what I learned from the diaries was that he had been a trapper, maybe a solitary fellow. His entries started normally, the same everyday animal sightings every day, weather, references to being alone being a balm for the soul. Then, overnight, the tone shifted wildly over the span of a few weeks. He spoke of whispers among the trees, hushed at first, later insistent. He spoke of catching sight of his own reflection carrying on its own solitary business in the glass window pane, of hearing someone voice his own thoughts aloud before he had even made them. There's something here, one part read, something beneath the forest. Not alive, not dead, older than memory. He explained to me that the forest itself traveled overnight, its shape varying. That trails he'd hike in the morning would be gone by late afternoon. That the cabin would rock back and forth while he slept, ever so slightly. The last entry sent chills up my spine. It waits under the floor. I can hear it breathing. I think it wears my face now. I let the journal fall and backed away, pages flying open like an opened wound. I had no idea why, but I really wanted to clear the cabin at that moment. But something unseen, persistent sense or something deeper, held me in place. At night, the quiet shifted. It wasn't empty any longer. It was full, claustral. Something was pushing on the walls of the cabin, pushing on the limits of it, testing it for weaknesses. I left on the lights, all of them, and propped myself up on the cot, the journal lying next to me like some obscene relic. The lights in the cabin were flickering at 3:12 a.m. Not once, not as a fluke, but in a pattern. 3 blinks, wait, 2 blinks, wait, then 3 once more, like Morse code. I looked at the generator. Full, no interruptions. When I came back inside, I saw the door open. I closed it. I was sure of that. I was frozen in the middle of the room, every muscle tensed. The atmosphere was dense, pungent, as if whatever was breathing was just under the surface of being. My ears throbbed with a high pitch, and beyond it, something else. Something wet. Something shuffling underneath the floorboards as if the ground itself was breathing through dirt. I did not sleep. On the 7th day, I started seeing it. Not literally, never fully articulated, but I could feel it around me, in thoughts, in shadows on the ground where there was nothing. It took my position. It floated around me, and when I stopped moving, it crawled inside of me. I covered the mirror on the sink with a towel and caught glimpses of myself, my reflection winking when I wasn't, smiling when my mouth was closed. Later that night, I saw something tall and thin glide between the trees in front of the window. It did not have a face, but I knew it the moment I saw it. It was what I had been seeing in the dreams, the one observing the cabin from above. And now, it was down to greet me. I ran out of the cabin that night. I only brought what I could, and walked the dirt road back to the main road. But the road was different. The forest wasn't the same. Trees I walked past curved back on themselves. Roots curved in strange ways. I walked what seemed like hours, but the cabin always stood before me, regardless of direction. I screamed once, not in fear, but in spite. I cursed the woods, the quiet, whatever creature had my face and walked in my shape. And from somewhere, I couldn't believe it was so near. I heard my own voice echoing back. It echoed my scream in exact pitch, but not exact timing. It waited. There was a delay, a pause, as if the echo needed to recall how to be me. By day 9, I had given up hope of escaping. I no longer believed the forest would offer escape. The cabin was a trap indeed, but one of mind rather than wood and nails. It was psychological, existential. I began doubting time itself. The clocks no longer kept pace. My wristwatch spun in spasmodic fits. Days and nights blended into one. I would blink, and the sun would be missing. Blink again, and it would be there, stuck among the treetops. Worst of all was forgetting things. I would forget ordinary things. I would forget my mother's name, the color of the paint on our family house, the sound of my own voice. I would wake up with dirt under my fingernails and not remember crawling out of the cabin. I would wake up with handprints on the windows, pressed from the inside. I was no longer alone. But it was not companionship. It was occupation. Something was taking my place, slowly, on purpose. A psychological infestation. It grew, not on fear, but on identity. On the 10th day, I discovered the basement. I had not seen the trapdoor previously. A rug that I had pushed aside to sweep. Small, no wider than could fit through. No stairs, a rusty ladder into darkness. I do not know what made me go down. Maybe madness, maybe surrender. The desire to face what tormented me. The air grew colder with every step, and the walls yielded to stone soon enough, moist and echoing every breath back 1,000 times. Down at the bottom there was a room, round, ancient, symbols carved into the stone in spirals, uninterpretable, and it stood there. A figure. My height. My build. My face. It faced me, not moving, but as if the world revolved around it. Its lips did not speak, but I heard my own voice. You are not the first. You will not be the last. And then silence once more. Not absence. Presence. It was closing in on me and I retreated, but I felt it already, in me, forgetting resonant thoughts. I ascended the ladder and slammed the trapdoor behind me, though I knew it was useless. I departed from the cabin the following morning. I don't know how. I don't remember the way. One moment I was at the stove, and the next I was on the shoulder of a road, smeared with leaves and mud. A passing truck stopped. The driver inquired if I needed help. I couldn't remember my name. I could barely remember words. Time has passed. Years, in fact. I've since been able to get a lot of myself back on the surface. I went back to the city. I got new work. I laugh. I socialize. But occasionally, when I walk by a mirror, I stop. I look too long. And sometimes, it looks back. I have no clue what Dagger Ridge really is. A location? A curse? Something that exists? All I do know is this. If you're by yourself and the quiet builds up to be alive, don't believe your mirror. Don't believe the woods. And above all, never go under the floor. I'm Jake Turner, and for the life of me, I don't understand why I'm being forced to do this all over again. Perhaps it is because of how important it is. Perhaps because I need to get rid of it. I tell myself if only I got it down in writing, then at last it would leave me alone, scratching at my head on my head like some famished beast. But deep inside, I know I'm lying. Certain stories refuse to let you escape. They leave their mark on your soul. It started one cold November evening in Murphy's, a miserable pub between two rundown brick buildings. It was the kind of pub where you'd never find yourself there by mistake if you had anything to say about it. The neon sign fought as if with its dying breaths, the light too weak to push away the darkness that whirled about it. Within, the air hung thick with stale beer, flat whiskey, and despair that infects men's marrow who drink to forget. I'd been there for months yelling and smoking until the wee hours, but this night was different. I knew it as soon as I opened the door, like the pub gave me permission. There were the regulars, hammered old men on their pints, two hard men in the corner booth, Murphy drying a glass that never would be, and me stumbling through the door searching for him. And then I did see him. He sat at the far end of the bar, where the air was dark enough to keep out light. Chin low, nose in the brim of his hat. Something wasn't quite right about him. Not flamboyantly, enough to make hairs at the back of my neck race up in fear. He wasn't drinking, he wasn't even breathing, he just sat as still as a corpse. I attempted to turn my head away from him as far as I could, but I couldn't. My eyes would find themselves returning to him over and over again, like a moth is irresistibly drawn to the flame. There was a void in him, a void that was making my stomach turn over. And just when I was fighting the urge to look away, he raised his head. His eyes, if you could even say that, weren't normal. They were black, blacker than black, like they just went and kept going, like something was poking through in there under like a mask. And he was smiling. Not a natural one. Not the kind you wear when you're smiling or laughing. This wasn't that. This was stiff, slow, a smile that shouldn't be on a human face. I turned around, holding my glass so hard my knuckles went white. I was seeing things. I was drunk. But when I looked again, he was closer, sitting, gazing, still smiling. But he'd gotten up. I could have sworn I hadn't missed it. No way you can slip out that fast so quietly. I swallowed a vile mouthful. I asked Murphy, the rest of the others in the room. None of them had seen anything. I could tell myself, go, rise up and go. I did not, could not. My body disobeyed orders. Minutes, perhaps hours had passed. The clock on the wall continued ticking. The taste was gone from the liquor. The noise of the bar faded away as though I were drowning and heard everything. Then he was by my side. I had not seen him stand. I blinked, and he was there in front of me. Rotting, foul-smelling decay clung heavily to him in the air. I rotated the head slowly about him, not wanting to make any sudden motion. He smiled again. I gazed at him more intently. Tight skin stretched taut over his bones, cracked, dry lips that split at the sides, and his eyes, black, empty holes. He moved closer, and I swear the air chilled. Bar didn't say a word now. Air too thick to breathe. Do you see me? They weren't said. They were felt. Creeping into my ears, beating in my blood. Couldn't answer, couldn't blink, couldn't breathe. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Bar din in my head. Laughter, clinking ice, buzz of voices. Stool beside me was vacant. Air warmed again. I glanced at Murphy. He grumbled once more over the same stinkin' glass. See this what this man did? I rasped, prying apart in my broken voice. Murphy glanced over at me. What man? I swallowed and glared at the bikers, the old ones. No one seemed to have even noticed. I was losing it, I thought. I staggered out of the pub, darkness greeting me in the face. I reminded myself that I was drunk, seeing things. I knew better. And proof presented itself the next night, and the one thereafter. He just continued to appear. Wherever I happened to be at that bar, there he would appear, always lurking on the edge of my awareness, always closer when I drew back. And never, never did anyone else appear to see him. I didn't sleep. Dine didn't. Night after night I vowed I'd never return again. And night after night I drifted toward Murphy's door as if irresistibly attracted thereto. And one evening, he wasn't sitting on the bar stool. He was standing outside on the sidewalk. I ran. I don't really know how I made it home. But once I had closed the door behind me, I knew every inch of my body, how it was not done yet. I don't go back to Murphy's. Doesn't matter. He still seeks me out. In my mind, in the dark, in the not home in between. He is sitting beside me at the moment as I sit and write, smiling. And I wonder if he is with me. I have no idea when I slept, but I did. Because I woke up in darkness. Not darkness of the sort where you become accustomed, and form is felt in darkness. No, Night had invaded my bedroom like a homebody. Thick air hung overhead as if it was living, and I heard it, a whisper, gentle, in my ear. "You see me." Felt chilled all over. Did not breathe, did not stir, but knew. A figure, at the end of my bed, grinning, waiting. The room shifted in composition. The room was cold. Then the bed creaked, like something landed upon it. I squeezed my eyelids shut tighter, willed myself awake, to scream, but roll over. Then, nothing. For minutes, maybe hours, nothing. Nothing but the slap of my own heartbeat in my own skull. And then I sensed something. Cold, wet stink breath on the side of my face. Near, closer. I have no idea what happened afterwards. Maybe I passed out. Maybe my brain just called it a day. I do know that when I woke up, the room was empty, other than the closet door, which was open. And I swear that I could see something moving in there, still smiling. And then the creaking of the front door opening downstairs. And I knew. He wasn't gazing anymore either now. He was inside, and he was waiting for me to glance at him once more. Because ever since I can remember, silence has been my solace. In quiet, the world releases distractions, and the mind is a theater on which the thoughts put on their most sensational performances. I have welcomed solitude not as refuge, but homecoming, a welcome to that inner realm beyond madness. This love of quiet directed me almost irresistibly along the path of obscurity. While others ascended ladders of success and power, I crept unobtrusively into a career that provided quiet. I was a state archivist, a title forgotten in a forgotten corner of the earth. My work was done in the basement of an ancient city records building, one whose design was more a product of the last century, but one than of the contemporary world. Nobody ever went down to the basement. Those who remembered its presence were few and steered clear of it with diplomatic contempt. The top floors had been renovated over the years into spotless, modern offices, but the basement stayed the same, untamed in some accounts. Its wooden beams groaned like aged bones, and the walls exhaled the stale scent of mold and time. The dust smell, rust and mildew formed an invisible haze that clung to your skin and lingered. I didn't complain. I had my papers, my desk, and the endless flow of time. That is, until there was a disturbance of noise. At first, it was merely a hint of sound, a gentle thud, maybe a misplaced echo, or the creaking groan of old pipes. It was late in the afternoon when the stillness of dusk settled over the thin windows of the basement like a bruise. The first time I heard it, I did but pause for a moment, letting the moment slip harmlessly away. The sound came again the following night, and the night following that. A rhythm had been developed. At first, it was a scraping, dragging noise under the floor, then a slow thud. It wasn't machinery, it wasn't haphazard, it was practiced. I wrote it off at first. Sanity demands the most immediate explanation. Pipes creaking, rodents burrowing, foundations settling. But then, with time, the rhythm became too predictable, too calculated. It came every day at 6:46 p.m., always, never missing. The noise never bounced off the room. It had nowhere to bounce. Rather, it reverberated right beneath me, as if some animal below me had simply focused exactly where I was sitting and told them all about it with sheer tenacity. And the dreams. At first, they were shards, dark passageways, far-off screams, creeping shadows in strange forms. I would wake up covered in sweat, racing heart thudding in a rhythm not so dissimilar from the one under the floor. But later, the dreams changed. I started to envision a room, a buried room bedded in mud and blood, illuminated by dozens of gutted-out candles, their light casting quivering shadows against stone walls. In the center of the room, a man was outstretched, arms ripped from shoulders, lips flung wide open on a scream that was nigh an animal. His eyes were not vanished, not punched from sockets, not closed. Just gone. When I woke up, my fingertips were filthy. I started to notice tiny things occurring in the basement when I was around. My pens went missing and reappeared at odd locations. A chair would move a couple of inches at night. Files that I hadn't even laid hands on were somehow pulled out of the cabinets and left on my desk. Pages open to which I'd never read previously. And then there were the folders. Every evening, after the sound had completed its ceremonial thud, a sealed and waiting manila envelope would appear on the intake tray. The folders had no name, file number, and were never added to any internal records. They just existed. The first folder held a grainy black and white photo inside. It was a photo of a man, perhaps the same one from my dreams, twisted on the ground, his bones clearly broken, mouth twisted impossibly wide. The photo was blurry in spots, either from motion blur or degradation, but the pain was unmistakable. There were scrawls in the dirt around him, curling towards his battered body. There was no note with it, no context, no date. The second document contained typed transcripts of handwritten interviews for 1923, with the laborers who originally built the municipal building. What they had testified to was something that chilled your bones. A room found beneath the foundation during digging. It wasn't mentioned on any map of the city, and it didn't reveal any indication of previous human engineering. The room was older than anything they'd ever seen, wild, as if it had been hewn out by hand with stone or bone-crafted tools. Not long after finding it, they started to come down with symptoms: migraines, nosebleeds, hallucinations. One of the workers slashed his own throat with a trowel. Another disappeared entirely, his equipment and clothing carefully folded by the door to the chamber. The chamber was closed and left untouched, until today. One of the sentences in those transcripts was dissimilar. There's something in the ground, something old. It whispers when nobody's around. I heard it. I heard it whisper my name. I remained in my seat for a few minutes after reading that sentence in absolute silence. Not out of fear, but because I knew. I had heard it too, not with ears, not out loud, but in the marrow of my bones, in the heaviness behind my eyes, in the stillness of my mind. A presence, patient, ancient, watching. I tried to warn my superiors. My messages were not given heed. Phone calls were left on hold for hours. When I went up to the second floor and tried to approach an individual face to face, I discovered that every door was shut, every office vacant. What few colleagues I did meet shunned my eyes, consulting each other before suddenly excusing themselves. I realized that I had been quietly excluded from the living functions of the building. I was alone again. Worse, no, I was observed. I felt I had to look into this. Evening. After dark had fallen over the farthest recesses of the basement and the creek had started evening rounds, I removed the board from under my work desk. Under the boards lay packed soil, thick and damp, strangely warm to the touch. Delving further with fingers, the soil receded, as if it had a life. Hours of excavation produced it. A trapdoor, decaying, old, bound together by rusted iron clasps. Its surface was scarred with gouges, deep, wild, furious, as though whatever was inside had once tried to claw out. The metal shrieked when I forced it open. The odor that leaked was indescribable. It was a reek of rot on rot, earth and the stench of centuries past. I descended, candle held aloft, to light it and bring this foul room to light, creaking with every step beneath me, fighting for air, a martyr to the noxious gases below. That which I encountered below was no longer a chamber. It was a cathedral. Gigantic in stature, unplannable. The walls curved in and out, covered with symbols that pulsed and sparkled with a wet, breathing sheen. The floor was rough, scattered with bones and ash, as if hundreds had been pulled down here and dumped to rust into dust. And in the middle, the altar. It was 8 feet tall, made of obsidian, covered in a heavy dark substance that glimmered in the flickering light. On its pedestal were human faces, mouths open in constant screams, their faces contorted as if caught in the moment of death. They were surrounded by the watchers, Dozens, perhaps even hundreds of emaciated forms stood rigid in the blackness. Their faces were pulled taut across grotesquely lengthened skulls. Their eyes were empty holes, pits of nothingness. They did not breathe. They did not rock. They simply observed. They did not instill terror. They instilled clarity. I recognized them, not away, but indeed. These were the ones who had preceded us. Archivists, workers, builders, all those who had been bold enough to find out what was supposed to have stayed secret. And now they stood waiting, not for forgiveness, but for inheritance. One of them moved forward. It reached out a hand, the fingers incredulously long, narrowing to razor tips. I extended my own hand and took it. Suddenly, a burning pain ran through my body. My consciousness was torn apart. My mind filled with visions of old ceremony, blood rituals, and prayers not spoken in words, but felt across the stomach, the teeth, the heart. I had known the world as it once was, covered in forests that stretched to infinity, ruled not by man, but by beasts that slept beneath roots and stone. The room was no accident. It was a prison, a womb, a temple, and something inside it had awakened. When I finally came out hours, perhaps days later, I was changed. The noise no longer annoyed me. It greeted me. The building, which had been so alien and impersonal, now felt flesh and bone, warm and living, breathing in rhythm with my thoughts. The folders ceased to arrive. There was no requirement for them. The knowledge now remained within me. The trapdoor stayed open. I come down each night and I listen. I am greeted by the watchers. They tell me things. Faces of others who will be arriving to join us shortly. Names that I don't know, but never forget. I no longer eat. I no longer sleep. I record. I take note. Because there will be other individuals arriving. They always do. They will hear the noise, just like me. They will dig, urged on by the whispers that seep into the cracks of the mind. And when they pry open the door, I will be waiting for them. Not as a man, but as something else. Something beneath. Because when the earth has you, it never releases. And in the darkness beneath the boards, something remains to be remembered. Forever. I always loved quiet, especially quiet that comes from a lonely road at night. The world outside the windshield is a sea of black, and the hum of tires on roads is almost spiritual. But then there is silence so deep, so artificial, a silence that's too deliberate to be real. I once found it. I never drove at night again. It is a tale that I do not readily share. It rewired my brain, shattered my perception, and most eerily, left me to wonder if the highway remembers the people on it. It began on a cold November night, one of those nights when even the air seems to be dead. I was traveling by car across the country for work, a drive that cut its path through rural towns and empty expanses of land. My GPS had led me off the highway, onto a lesser-used road, State Road 113, a road I'd never known, and I'm glad to know the cartilage structure of the country. It was fine at first. 2 lanes, broken road, miscellaneous highway sign so worn you'd think it was embarrassed by its own letters. I could have had an hour of driving left until I arrived at the motel that I'd booked. But hours tend to break when you're alone on a highway that doesn't want to be crossed. It began to change at about 10 minutes in. It wasn't the landscape or the weather, it was the atmosphere. The moon, in full and brilliant brightness, was shrouded behind a blanket of thick, unwinking clouds. The trees lining the road, once rigid silhouettes, now seemed to fold inward upon one another to eavesdrop. Their arms reached across the road, weaving together like fingers, and wove intricate shadows on the earth, changing unblowingly. I killed the radio. I did not realize that it had been picking up static for a few miles. The motor growled harder in the silence, and the headlights melted away into nothing, vanishing into the blackness which they were lighting. But I kept going. A logical brain requires logic. This was exhaustion, I told myself falsely. Maybe I had taken a wrong turn somewhere, but the GPS indicated I was on the right path. That was when I saw the signs. They were commonplace at first glance, but they all signified nothing, merely a mark cut deeply into metal. A circle, bisected by a vertical line that tapered thinner into what seemed barbed roots. I passed the first one quietly. The second bothered me. By the third, my hand on the wheel had clenched involuntarily. They grew more frequent. Each quarter mile, another showed up, some of them twisted into impossible shapes as if some kind of inhuman force had deformed them. They were fewer and fewer markers and more warnings, headstones. But there was no shoulder to go on, no crossroads, no exits. The road stretched out before me, eating my headlights, drawing me along. And then the deer. Or at least something I could have sworn was a deer. It was in the road still, turned away from me. I slowed, horn blaring softly to scare it away. It did not move. The skeleton was gaunt, flesh draped over bony ridges, patches of fur completely gone. But the legs stopped my lungs. They were too long, misjointed, bent the wrong way like spider legs. A grotesque mockery of anatomy. I veered out of the way. In passing, my peripheral vision saw something unthinkable. The head was not that of a deer. It was human. Hairless, white, and turned upside down, as if it had been spun in a backwards motion. The eyes were closed with stitches, and the mouth was open in a silent shriek. I did not turn back. The woods became darker. The trees seemed to close in more tightly, a wall of trees behind me. My GPS died. The screen flickered and died. I was alone, completely and utterly alone. Then I caught a whiff, bitter and metallic as if too long in the standing water of aged metal. It clung to the car, heavy in my lungs, sticking to the weave of my clothing. The air grew thick, more difficult to breathe. My chest tightened, as if something had come to rest across it. There was a vibration that began, barely detectable at first, pulsing through the steering wheel, into my hand, into my bones, composed of metal and alive both. A vibration beyond sound, and settled directly in the brain. My headlights picked up motion off the side of the road. I first believed it was my own image, shattered by some deceitfulness of the glass. But no, it kept in pace with me. A slender, tall presence, keeping precisely my pace, though there was no limb apparent that moved. A faceless shape, blacker than the blackness about it, as if light itself avoided it. It did not move. It floated. When I braked, so did it. When I accelerated, so did it. I could not perceive its shape, only the outline, impossibly lengthened, intricately rippling, like smoke in a vacuum. I tried to convince myself that it was my mind doing tricks with me, but all my body's instincts refused to think so. I locked the doors. At mile marker 48, or I guess mile 48, the markers weren't marked. The road changed. The asphalt turned into gravel. My tires grumbled, protesting on hard pavement. The woods that flanked either side of me no longer existed, having been supplanted by what appeared to be charred earth. Blackened, dead, stretching miles across the horizon. And the sky. The sky was not night. It was something else. No stars. Swollen clouds all, slow and sticky like spilled water on ink. The bursts of red light within the sky occasionally, but not in sequence of lightning. The air itself charged with invisible electricity. And that is when I saw the houses. Burned out houses along the highway. Wooden houses fallen in on themselves, boards covering. Windows, some of which were destroyed. But every house had one open door. Every one of them. And at the doorway of every one of them was a figure, just like the one that had been following me. They didn't wave, they didn't move, they just stood, faced the other side of the road, waiting for me. I sped up. The road became narrower, the gravel more urgent, shaking the car frame. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel. I pleaded a God I no longer trusted. And then, the tunnel. It came on suddenly, an open face in the sight of a hill, hewn from stone and brimming with darkness. There was no light, no indication but that it was the sole path for moving on. It would be an even greater mistake to retrace steps in such a position. I went inside. The moment I entered, I could feel pressure in my ears. My peripheral vision was hazy. The walls of the tunnel were close, almost scraping against the sides of the vehicle. It was quiet in there. Too quiet. My engine was quiet. My breathing was stifled. Even my heartbeat was stifled. There were shapes against the walls. Carvings, hasty and deliberate. They told a story, but one I was too scared to confront head-on. There were faces twisted in agony, limbs twisted at impossible angles. A plunge into something past time and past words. I began to listen to whispers, not said out loud, but in the fabric of the tunnel itself. Not words, feelings, accusations. Memories never did. Regrets never did. But they did know me. They knew my name. The tunnel narrowed once more, darkness deepening, and then light, a sliver, far away. I accelerated, needing to leave there. The car surged forward. The whispers screamed. The faces chewed against the edge of vision. I kept mine steady, focused on inbound light. And with a final jerk, I came out of the tunnel and onto a prosaic road again. Thin trees spread dappled early morning light. Birds sang. GPS began to function. The stench was wiped out. Figure was nowhere to be seen. Shaking hands, but the world around me sprang back to life. I went straight to the nearest motel and did not leave my room for 2 days. When finally I worked up the nerve to go and view the car, I found that something had been scratched on the hood. Only visible, except under just the right light. The same mark as the road signs. A circle with a diagonal slash slashing through it, extending out in barbed roots. I sold the car shortly thereafter. And yet, from time to time, I still hear it. That hum. That vibration. I've read every map I could find. Digital, analog, satellite. State Road 113 does not exist. At least it no longer exists. Maybe it never did. But every now and then, late at night, driving somewhere else in some other state, I'll see that sign, for a moment. Out of the corner of my eye. And I know. The road remembers me. It knows my name. And someday, it will call me back. My name is Eric. Never did believe in ghosts and curses, never did. Always figured that there was always some kind of rational explanation for anything and everything out of the ordinary that ever happened in the world. Even if not everyone would necessarily be thinking along the same vein. This couldn't be explained. Not fear. Something else. Something that pervades your very marrow a good long while down the road after you do succeed in getting away. In the event that you did somehow succeed in getting away. I was one of the ones who liked drinking alone when he went out. Not unfriendly, just that bars were the type of place that people kinda lost a notch or two of guard. The more they'd drink, the more they'd act like actual human people, and I enjoyed it. It made the world real for a little bit. And I hardly even saw this bar when by chance I stumbled upon it tucked away in an alleyway. No signboard, no exterior neon sign, but a squeaky wooden door and a brass doorknob. Something from somewhere else. Somewhere out of all the rest of everything. I should have turned around then, but I didn't. The beginning. The first thing I hit with was the smell as I walked in. Not smoke or beer or the stale old bar smell to any bar. No. This one was wood and something muddy and wet like a cave. Dark, with long shadows crawling up onto the wood floorboards. There was a jukebox in the corner, but it wasn't playing. The bartender, a man who seemed never to have rested, and whose eyes were only so softly too bright for his crumpled face, came over. There wasn't quite anybody else in there lounging around at random around the room. A woman on the other side of the bar in a red cocktail dress, lipstick too heavily painted. A man in a suit drinking his whiskey, looking at him like I'd spilled some inside stuff. And the other two in clusters so that I wasn't even sure what they were discussing. They shared one thing. Neither of them looked at me. They were speaking to me. I, but with such a respect with which a predator plays with something which is climbing up onto the precipice, merely to see if it was worthwhile. I shot whiskey from the bar stool at the bar. It was slowly being poured by the bartender into the glass. It was darker than it would be, but I did manage to drink it all. Burnt to brown color. There really wasn't very much of the whiskey, but I complained about none of it. I merely placed the glass on the countertop and wasn't even aware that the room had a breath to catch. A moment at least. The middle not yet. I'd had my drink, I'd glared, I'd waited, and glared some more. The woman in the red dress, zero movement, not even an inch. Her own drink still unruffled in front of her, ice melted hours before. The suit guy, no flutter. Not that he wasn't not blinking, at least everybody, he wasn't not blinking at all. And the couple? They were doing the same thing, ad infinitum like a stuck record. I was firing dirty glares at the bartender, but he was no longer even looking my way. He was building a glass step by step, slowly and agonizingly, as if the world had all of eternity to waste. I had filled my stomach with a swallow, a lump of disgust in my stomach. "Where are we?" I snarled. No one replied. Then the jukebox spun around. Its song was slurred, singing like kelp. The red lady spat on me once again, smile on her lips, not in her eyes. "Leave me alone," she panted. She was too quiet, too far away from me, as if she didn't even stay in the room. I was filled with adrenaline. I rose up, but legs felt heavy like lead, like I'd spent an hour on that chair instead of 5 minutes. I gestured towards the door. It disappeared. The descent. No door. More bar, more tables, more faces that weren't moving anywhere right. The bartender wasn't looking at me, scrubbing his glass, but his reflection in the mirror behind him. His reflection wasn't leaving either. It was just standing straight in front of it, staring at me, not even flicking its lids. Panic crept up the side of my throat. I was attempting the door, turning. Walls were crashing to darkness now, collapsing. Tables folded in upon themselves. More faces where once there had been none. Faces were all wrong. Too even, too flat. Wax faces and stretched too tight. I had run to the closest window, but windows were now made of something else. It was black, looking down into an open well. My face looked back at me, but it wasn't moving the way it moved in the mirror. It was smiling, and the bartender refused to serve him. His voice was low with a hint of laughter. "You shouldn't have come here." The truth. I have no idea how long I was at the bar. Minutes? Hours? Years? Time meant nothing to me there. I screamed. I shouted. I fought. But nobody in the crowd did anything or said anything. I closed my eyes once. I opened them and was outside once more at the end of the alley. There was no door. A brick wall replaced where the door would have been. My muscles ached as if I had not moved for a week. My throat ached. My clothes were singed and smelt acridly of something else besides, something my fingertip couldn't keep up with. I don't drink alone anymore. I don't frequent dirty bars anymore. And I never, ever stand for an extended period of time in front of a mirror at midnight. Because occasionally, sometimes I would have sworn that I've caught a glimpse of that bar looking back at me. And I know that it's out there waiting for me. The aftermath I did try to forget. I swear to it. Freedom and forgetting were the two different things. Nightmares followed a week later. The bar was the same. Black lights, darkened room, the jukebox still playing that horrible song. But in dreams, I never broke free. I wake up gasping, the reek of the bar on my breath. Some nights I can swear the bartender is shouting my name. There are nights I wake up with my head in the alley, with my hand jammed up against cold brick where the door used to be. I started looking around too. Shadows where shadows shouldn't be. Faces in throngs where faces shouldn't be. I'll look into your face. My mirror vision watches me whenever I don't turn around to look at you. And now and then, for a moment, the bar reappears, spilling over between two buildings that don't give it room, holding its breath until I push open the door. I had something in my pocket last night. A receipt, all folded up. For a whiskey, after I'd been to the pub. There were dozens of scribbles in the pen, but you could just make out the bottom line. "See you soon." I am not coming back. But I do not believe that it is any good now, because I think the bar will not wait for my return. I think it is what comes to me, and even if I try, I do not think that I can flee from this one. There's a creepy quiet that settles upon a house when you are genuinely alone. One not so much an absence of sound, but an awareness of the presence of another. Something age-old, something that watches. I learned the quiet when I was 24, during one of those sizzling, sweaty summers of keeping house for my uncle in countryside Vermont. The house sat at the boundary of a heavily wooded estate, separated from even the closest neighbor by almost half a mile of overgrown forest. I had arrived in search of solitude, a temporary escape from the city madness. But what I discovered instead was something that forever changed my concept of isolation and of terror. My uncle's home had been enormous but otherwise unadorned. A two-story colonial with emerald green shutters and a big, creaking porch, the house seemed to have that antique feel to it. One could hear by the way the wind shifted that wood bones creaked, the way the windows sighed quietly at night as if someone breathed just beyond the glass. But it wasn't the structure that unsettled me. It was what began to occur after the third night. Initially, it was slight, steps very slight, traversing the upstairs hall while I lie in bed and read. I brushed them away easily, considering that the house was settling down. But then the steps made their way on the next evening, only to find that I had left the door to my bedroom open. I glanced upwards and swore to have seen something, a shadow making its way out of the door from the periphery of my vision. I froze, heart hammering, waiting for the form to return. It never did. I reminded myself repeatedly that I was just tired, that the hollowness and silence were delusions my mind was conjuring. I had to think that way. I clung to that belief as desperately as I would a lifeboat, even when shadows started creeping abnormally along the peripheries of every room and nighttime air. Started feeling cold in defiance of the sweltering summer heat. By the fifth evening, I dreaded sleeping. Not due to unpleasant dreams, those did not occur until later, but because it was in the quiet of the blackness alone that the house truly came to life. It started with the tapping, a measured, slow noise at the end of the second floor. It started exactly at 2:13 in the morning and stopped exactly at 2:17. 4 minutes, never more, never less. I timed it, I taped it, but when I replayed the tape the following day, there was nothing. No noise, none even of ambient room sounds. The recording was dead, as if it had caught something it was not meant to catch. It was then that I started locking my bedroom door, a fleeting solace. The locks were rusty old mechanisms that hardly clicked shut, and the wood around them was dry and crumbly with age. But it made me feel safe, though I knew for certain that it would not be effective. On the seventh night, I woke up to not tapping but to quiet, absolute, choking quiet. No crickets outside the window, no wind, no creaks. Just the presence that I felt in the room with me. I couldn't see it. I couldn't hear it. But I knew. My flesh crawled. My breath caught in my throat as if air about me had become thick. I did not move. I didn't even blink. And then I sensed it, breathing. It was from under my bed. Slow, steady breaths like an animal that didn't want to be seen. I stayed there for what seemed like hours, racing heart, wide eyes in the dark, and then morning, and the moment was gone as if it never existed. I did not sleep that evening or the following one. I was sitting up, lights on, back against the room wall as if a man bracing for a storm that he cannot divert. I tried to call my friends, but the line there was spotty. I thought of going away, but there was some invisible pressure, suffocating, gentle, that held me down. A part of me spoke, cold and detached, stating that to go away would be to acknowledge it. And when I acknowledged it, it would occur. I discovered the crawl space open on the 10th night, a tiny hatch at the back of the guest bedroom closet, small enough to crawl through only just. My uncle had told me not to enter. He had said there were rats. I had never even handled it. But the door was ajar that night. Inside, the air was impossibility cold. and a blackness darker than anything I had ever known appeared to throb forth from it. I closed the hatch, locked up the closet, and didn't go back. That evening, the tapping started again, but this time from inside the walls. And this time it continued through till dawn. I started hearing voices, not loud, not clear. A rustle in back of the walls below the boards, a whisper downstairs when I was alone. I did my best to push them back. I secluded myself in ritual, meals, walking, reading, but none maintained the semblance for very long. The house stared back at me. I understood that from the mirrors, from the windows. I ceased glancing at myself once I glimpsed it winking when it shouldn't. On the 12th day, my head had started to break down. Sleep was impossible. My hands shook all the time. I couldn't eat. I phoned my uncle, but the calls never went through. I used the internet. Nothing would load. I attempted to drive into town, but the road widened every time I attempted to do so, as if the house was moving gradually away from the outside world. And then, on the 13th night, things shifted. I woke to the sound of sobbing. Downstairs, muffled, heartbreaking weeping, human, undeniable. Me, I screamed at myself to remain where I was, to act like I didn't hear it, to make it go away. Something inside me stirred, though. I had to see. I had to know. I came down the stairs, my toes bare, every step a thunder in the quiet. The crying was louder when I got to the living room, and then it ceased. I entered the room, and it was empty, save for a mirror, one that didn't exist before. It stood nearly 7 feet high, its body twisted lattice of wood and iron, vines carved down its sides. But the photo was incorrect. It depicted the room as it was, same lighting, same furniture, but I wasn't there. I stared at it for a long time, and then, almost imperceptibly, something else crept into the picture. It was tall, taller than me. Its limbs impossibly long, its body gaunt, as if it had been deprived of sunlight and heat for centuries. Its face was a blur, a smear of darkness, but its eyes were human, and they were mine. I spun around and ran, but the house reoriented itself around me once more. The hallways rewound, doors disappeared. It was as if the walls themselves had become conscious, reforming to ensnare me. I have no idea how I ended up back in the bedroom. I recall closing the door, leaning against it, and screaming until I was raw. That night the dreams came. They were not dreams. They were not. They were memories, not mine. A life lived in the dark. A child hidden under the floorboards. A voice telling him he could be free, telling him he was loved, every day, until he did not know what the sun felt like. Until he did not know his own name. Until the voice was him. I woke up sweating, my brain shattered by images that weren't mine. I attempted to depart the following morning, bags full, keys in pocket, but the car would not move. The battery had died, tires flat. I ran down the driveway, the woods shutting in around me, but the farther I went, the more lost I felt. Trees mirrored each other. Landmarks disappeared. I ran in circles for hours before crashing to the ground, crying, at the bottom of the porch, and the door was open already, waiting. I never had visitors in that house. There was something else there, something old, something hungry. It lived on loneliness, on fear, on the slow wearing away of self. It waited for people like me, people who thought they needed solitude, but had no concept of what solitude was. On the 15th day, I quit. I sat in the living room and looked at the mirror, waiting. When the reflection changed, I did not scream. I did not run. I got up and watched as the thing moved behind me in the glass, then gradually turned, hoping that it would be there. But the room was empty, except for me. And yet, I was not alone. Not anymore. I have no idea how many days have gone by since that happened, if that was even a day. The clocks ceased their tick. The sun ceased rising or setting according to any perceivable rhythm. Time itself has started to crumble around me. the hours pouring from my hands like grains in an hourglass. The house has closed down, the windows no longer glassed, now black as if coated with soot. The doors, which were locked with keys I could touch and turn, have become trappings, ornamental deceptions of liberty. Sometimes I attempt to persuade myself otherwise, to persuade myself that this is a dream, that I never left the city, that I am lying in some hospital bed, sedated, hallucinating. But such a notion perishes instantaneously, driven off by the incompatibility of the existence of what I see and what I touch. This is real. This is no longer a house. It is a mouth, and I am within it. The monster in the mirror came back. It never shifted while I was looking at it, but every time I blinked or turned my head, its place had altered. Initially, behind me, then to my right, then closer. Its face, lost in shadows, has started revealing itself. Not at one go, but in bits, as if it was dropping a mask of centuries of grief. I have seen its eyes, and I am certain that they are not simply imitations of mine. They belong to me. There is no other explanation. I think that this thing, this presence, is not a demon nor a ghost. It is something born of myself, from the darkest corners of my own mind, formulated and given shape by the emptiness, the silence, the debilitative loneliness of this place. It is the madness that I concealed behind habits and smiles. It is madness, and madness has learned to walk. I attempted to burn the mirror. I pounded on it with a fireplace poker, screaming like a madman, hammering again and again until my arms failed. But it would not shatter, not even the smallest hairline fracture. The glass flexed as if it were a liquid and absorbed the blows like flesh. And I stood there gasping, blood from my knuckles, and I saw the thing inside hunch in and smile. I have not been in that room since. I sleep in brief, broken intervals now. When I do, the dreams return. The crawlspace boy appears to me every night, white face rising out of the shadows like a flower of decay. His eyes are red from crying. His lips are ripped. He doesn't say anything, but his face is weighed down with sorrow. Ancient, ancient sorrow. It haunts me even after I wake, a film of sorrow on my skin. I started to hear the voices again from the walls, but now they are chanting my name. They don't whisper it, they chant it, softly in time like a love song written by something that has never known love. It starts at 2:17 a.m. these days, the exact time when the tapping used to cease, as if the house is learning, adapting, determining my limits. It no longer needs to scare me. It is calling to me. I've seen the change in me as well. My mind has started to turn inward. At times I find myself hearing the sound of my own voice inside my head saying things I never even considered. Rough things, violent things. I find my hands shaking with stored up fury, but I have no direction, no recollection of why. I awoke last night standing in front of the mirror. I have no memory of going there. I was just there, naked, cold, gazing into the glass. The reflection indicated the room, empty, but something hidden could be seen through the glass, under the floorboards, behind the walls, deep beneath the foundation. It was a door, and I knew that the truth lay on the other side of the door. The heart of this house, the key to all things. But the house won't admit me. It distracts, it confuses, it fills me with visions and noises that break my will apart like moist paper. I've heard my mother's voice calling me home. I've seen my own dead body floating in the tub. I've seen windows reveal forests burning, skies rent asunder, stars plummeting. I can't rely on my senses anymore. Reality is a game that I'm losing, and still, I go on. For there must be something inside me that knows, even now, even as I can feel my own mind breaking like stains on glass. I woke up this morning to a new noise, a gentle scratching under my bed again, but this time accompanied by a soft whisper, a voice nudging against my head like a wet rag. You are not alone. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just sat up, pulled my legs over the side of the bed, and looked at the floor. The boards creaked. Something shifted under them, slow and deliberate. I whispered again, "I know." And then, for the first time, the house answered with silence. Not the strangling kind, but a thick stillness, like the quiet before a birth or a death. The floorboard under my feet groaned and then cracked. And out of it, something stretched upwards. Not a hand, not claws, just flesh. Impossibly white, silky smooth skin, stretching upwards like the head of a drum, and then cracking a fraction to create what was unmistakably an eye. It blinked once. I did not move. It blinked a second time, and then it disappeared, withdrawing back into the darkness under my room. I know what it was. It was me. Not the me that resides in this house, the other me, the one that stares back at me in the mirror, the one in the crawl space, the one that I will eventually become. This house is not trying to hurt me. It is trying to devour me, to become one with me. And slowly I am starting to realize that destiny. Not because I want it, but because fighting has lost its meaning. The longer I waste fighting back, the stronger it becomes. The more defiance I provide for it, the more it is fed. And I am spent. So infinitely spent. Tonight, I go into the crawl space. I know the door is ajar. It always is. Something lurks down there waiting for me. A final revelation, a final terror. Or perhaps a savior in a disguise I will never recognize. Should I ever get back, I will write again. Otherwise, let this epistle be sufficient proof. Not that monsters and hauntings and ghosts exist, but that loneliness, cold, unbroken loneliness, starts taking away the facades of reality. And what's left is something vast lurking in wait, something endless, something hungry. I am Elijah Ward. I arrived here in order to be alone, and now no longer will I be alone. There are nights which divide your life in two, before and after. I learned it through a sort of absolute knowledge that can only be achieved through fear. I lived a world that to me was safe, warm, and familiar before the night. And everything seemed changed after the night. It was as if there was some threatening danger in the atmosphere, as if silence has teeth. I was 17, and my parents had just left for a 2-day weekend to a wedding in another state. They had never left me home alone before. I had promised them I would be fine, even cheerful, to spend the weekend by myself. We lived in a quiet suburb where nothing ever occurred. Neatly manicured lawns, white picket fences, and middle-aged neighbors who watered their roses with mechanical accuracy. The house itself, while old, was large and well-maintained. My room was up one flight of stairs at the other end of the hall, behind 2 heavy oak doors that efficiently deadened sound. They left on a chilly autumn evening, orange leaves strewn across the lawn, the sky a dampened gray that seemed to tilt lower with the minutes. I remember the early hours were peaceful. I reheated leftover lasagna, watched television with lights dimmed, and for the first time, felt like an adult king of my own little kingdom. That sense of dominion would not endure the night. I was going up the stairs around 11 with a glass of water in one hand and my phone in the other. Something was wrong. The upstairs hallway was chilly, normally so. Our heat had been kept at a constant level, and the shift had been cold enough to notice. I paused, a step below the landing, and breathed out. A delicate misted steam flowed from my lips. I had assumed it was because of an anomaly. Perhaps a vent was not functioning, or someone had left one of the windows open. I walked to my room, locked the door, and leaned against the bed, draping the blanket around me. The cold did not let up, though. Sleep refused to come. Any creak of the house, once so familiar and innocuous, now sounded ominously novel. I reassured myself it was nothing, that I was simply more sensitive to the sounds because I was alone. But there was a difference between paranoia and presence. One feeds imagination. The other seeps into your bones before you even know it's there. It was approximately 1:43 a.m. when I heard it, gentle footsteps on the boards beneath. Not a groan of loose wood or settling, but clear, intentional footfalls. I lay in bed, my ears alert to confirm what I wished was mere fantasy. The footsteps ceased. Silence flooded the house like a stalker standing still for the faintest movement. Minutes passed. Perhaps 5. Perhaps 15. Time can't be measured when you're under the claws of fear. I stood up slowly and moved towards the door. I did not open the door. Instead, I held my ear on the wood and listened. There was nothing. I returned to bed but did not switch off the light. I gazed at the door, the patch of shadow below it, the immobility of the brass doorknob. My heart pounded against the interior of my ribcage as if it were a prisoner keen to be released. Somewhere along the way, I must have drifted into a fitful, restless slumber. The noise was so much closer it woke me up again. It was a series of little tap-tap-taps, sounds that were happening at the window behind me. My frame went rigid. We lived at an angle and my bedroom window was on the second floor of our house. No branches ran that high. There was no rational explanation. I inched my head back, as if stirring something up. The drapes were closed, but the knocking went on. Unregulated, the sound of a finger against wood. Then it stopped. The quiet that followed had been louder than the uproar had been. It was resounding in my head so that each breath, each beat felt gigantic. I remained frozen in position for what must have been an hour. My body refused to let me sleep once more. Dawn felt appallingly distant, but nothing else took place all night long. The world outside by morning looked like nothing unusual had taken place. Blue sky unbroken above it, birds singing cheerfully, leaves trembling on the branches. I looked at the window. Not a scratch, not a mark that showed anything had ever rested against it. I kept telling myself that I'd imagined the whole thing. That tension and loneliness late in the night just caused the shadows to make things that they weren't really there for. The second night was when everything collapsed. I left the lights on in every room. I even had the television blaring downstairs as some kind of man-made comfort. I could simply not handle the silence any longer. I was upstairs at 10:30, door shut and blanket tightly in my hand. The power went off at 11:12. The house was full of unexpected blackness. No TV light, no hum of machine, no shadowy lighting of the hallway lamp. Dark, openly claustrophobic dark that filled the air and made the walls shut in. Panic had tried to creep in, but I held on to a deep breath. I grabbed my phone and activated the flash. It emitted a thin beam that shook as my hand shook. I glanced at the window again. Still closed. Still nothing outside the glass. Then I saw it. The door handle turned just a little ways down, not quite all the way, far enough to suggest that at some point someone had tried to open it, slowly, carefully. I had locked it. I was certain of it. I always did. I crept, kneeling to investigate the bottom of the door. There were smudges along the bottom. Greasy, unhuman. Not fingerprints, but impressions of something pushing or dragging against the wood. I was locked in place. My head was screaming that I wasn't alone. There was a brutal thud of something fallen or tossed from down the hallway. My phone actually moved almost out of my hand at the shock's passage through the house. I moved back away from the door and stepped farther back into the corner, wall against the sweep of my shoulder, flash casting weak quiver. Whispering started then. Not words, not quite, brought into the ear in a sort of rasping murmur, just audible at the margin of the sound. It crept through the wall around the door as if it went around in a circle, as if it snuck. I would have loved to scream, but even sound making was danger. The sound receded after a time. Time regained its shape again. When electricity returned a couple of hours later, I hadn't moved from where I had been sitting in the corner. I waited till sunlight caught me looking out from behind the window pane before opening the door even. The hallway was vacant. Nothing amiss. No sign of ever having existed there. But I knew. I stood outside the house waiting for my parents that day. I did not tell them the whole truth, only that there had been a power outage, and I had been frightened. I could not tell them the details. Not because I feared they would not believe me, but because explaining the experience aloud would make it real, make it tangible. Things were normal again during the course of the next few weeks, but I could not move on. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd jump out of bed, my heart racing, believing that I heard the same soft rapping on the window, or the whisper along the door edge. Months passed. I matured. I left home eventually, as you're meant to, but the fear never actually dissipated. It lingered in the quiet moments, in the periphery of quiet places. A reminder that sometimes security is only an illusion. And then, 2 years ago, there were reports in the news of a man found living on the roof of a suburban home, not too far from the one we once called home. He had been quietly in residence for months, surviving on stolen food at night, roaming the house by the darkness of night while the family was slumbering. They had no inkling. Not until they spotted the hatch cracked halfway open, a bedroll folded in insulation, and pieces of food stored in the shadows. He was taken away, naturally. But the worst part of it wasn't that. His face had been out of focus in the picture published in the newspaper. But the police description was something I had tried to push to the recesses of my mind. A thin, tall man, light-skinned, dark sunken eyes, almost animal in ferocity. The day that episode was shown, I returned to our old house. I stood outside looking up at the second-story window. My old bedroom. I thought about the walls still bearing impressions of that night. I thought about the door handle still bearing those small, oily smudges. I thought about the floorboard still remembering the slow, deliberate footfalls of something, or someone, who shouldn't have been there. They inform us that horror is actually a deformation of reality. But I've considered the fact that true horror is only reality stripped to the bone, exposed, unveiled from its comforting surface. And what I heard, what I saw that night when I was alone in the house, it was reality at its most brutal, darkest sense. My name's Andy Holloway. Driven my whole life, trucks, odd jobs, whatever gets me by. Never stuck around long enough, never got roots in the dirt. Maybe that's why I saw what I saw. Maybe that's why it ran into me. I don't drink at bars, never have. But that evening? That evening was the exception. I had been driving for hours, riding along the rural roads of some nowhere town. That type of place where the streetlights flicker on and off, and the gas pump guy looks at you like you're already dead. I had been passing through, searching for somewhere to close my eyes before starting the long ride home. This is where I noticed it. Hammond's Bar. A neon sign whirred overhead of the entrance, a greenish red light spilling onto the cracked sidewalk. No cars in the parking lot, no sound of music bleeding out. Only the whine of the sign and the creak of a swinging door. Something in my gut was insisting I walk around and head back down the road, but my brain was insisting that I was paranoid. I wanted a drink, or to be talked to, something to chase away the shyness in my body. So I went in. The air within was musty, wood and dust, but there was another underlying scent to it, one that I couldn't quite pinpoint, a smell of pennies and damp ground. The bar was deserted, apart from the bartender, a bony, thin man with hollow cheeks and eyes too dark to see where they began. He nodded slowly at me, as if anticipating. "Drink?" he said. I hadn't heard him in so long, as if he hadn't made a noise for days. I nodded. "Whiskey. Straight." He poured it methodically, staring at me the entire time. I should have run out there in an instant, but I accepted the glass, raised it to my mouth, and downed it. And that's when things began to go awry. The room leaned, just a little. Lights blinked like electricity was about to be turned off. I looked to the side, and for a moment the mirror above the bar didn't reflect me, only the empty stool that I sat upon. I blinked again. There I was, staring back at me. I shook it off, wrote it off as exhaustion, but my flesh prickled. Something was off. I moved to the bartender. He was still looking, still staring. Then he smiled. "You just made it," he said. "They're going to be here." I placed my drink on the bar, my heart pounding. "Who?" He simply nodded at the door, and that's when I heard it. The dragging footsteps outside. Dragging, slow, squelching, like something wet being dragged across cement. My fingers gripped the edge of the bar. "Who's out there?" I said, my voice quiet. The bartender smiled even wider. "Go find out." I wasn't kidding, but every molecule of my body screamed to get out. I shifted my head as the door groaned open. Something came that wasn't right. It had shape, contour, but bounced, as would stutter on a greasy TV set. My guts churned. The air felt thick and wet like breathing through soggy stuff. And it said, not words, not precisely, more ideas flowing into my brain like iced syrup. "You don't belong here." I withdrew, my knees trembling. My heart throbbed in my ears. "Who? What are you?" My voice fought through my throat. The beast didn't answer. It just moved one more step, its form blurring, shattering and reforming like smoke caught in a storm. I looked at the bartender. He was nowhere to be found. Only his empty clothes, slumped against the stool as if he'd leaked out of them. The whiskey jug on the counter was missing. The glass in my own hand, on the rocks, and empty. Was it ever filled? I shifted, heels ringing off stool. Things stirred again, inches nearer this time. Smell of pennies was pungent. Lights quivered and mirror on the rear wall shattered. Hairline fissures emanating from face like veins. And in glass I sensed something which to this day I do not know. It was me. In the bar. But my face was all wrong. Too white. Too stiff. My eyes were not mine. They were like the bartender's. Void. Black. Hollow. And then I understood. I never entered the bar. I was there the whole time. The beast unfolded before me, fingers lengthening, curling in ways impossible for fingers to. I was retreating, banging the door with so much force the glass trembled. It wouldn't budge. Hard, the wood refused to yield. My frantic struggle for breath. The monster virtually on top of me now, and its face was my own. The walls closing in on me pulsed, darkening. The wooden walls writhing like living flesh, breathing as I did, holding me inside. Vibrating the air, humming low within my structure. A vibration that was more feel in my bones than hearing, more the thrum of life itself. I felt the eyes upon me, unseen, watching, waiting. I turned, trying to find another way out, the back door. There must be one. I crawled through darkness, my legs more horizontal, but the passage went further with every step, as if I didn't move at all. The doors around me were wavy, sloping at absurd angles, their handles blending into wood, and a whisper, closer, right in my ear, "Stay." I spun around. Nothing. Darkness moving in, gathering up the light. My breath clogged in me as air congealing to choking. Walls closing in, closer and closer, and far off creaking open of the door again. More pulling, more shuffling. They were coming. I do not know what went on after that. Only a throbbing in my head as if my skull had been cracked from the inside out. And then, silence. I woke up in my car, parked on the side of the road, engine running. The tavern was gone. Barren land where it used to be. Shaking hands, chapped lips. But on the passenger side, neatly arranged and unbroken, was one whiskey glass. I did not drink it. I still won't. Because some things, if I close my eyes, I see the bartender's smile and the whoosh of the door. They will be coming soon. My name does not matter, and I link this memory not out of sympathy or condolence, but because silence has been too much to endure. I have lived in the shadow of such a ghastly reality for so many years that I barely know how to conceal truth from fiction, whether supernatural or some malevolent concoction of my imagination, or if it even predates the former and isn't that one either. I can never seem to tell for certain. The only thing that I can attest to is that something was present under my home, and as soon as it caught wind of me, it would not relinquish me. These events happened 7 years ago when I bought an old manor house in the North Country, far from the poisoned din of the city. It had been vacant for over a decade, its owner having vanished without a trace. The ad had been cryptically vague, the price obscenely low, but the house itself loomed above the desolate dead trees. A 3-story building with falling gables and a sagging roof, it exuded an uncanny dignity, like a corpse dressed in imperial robes. I did it myself, starved for loneliness. I was experiencing a loss of my own back then, one that I might not even speak of, and I stupidly assumed loneliness would mend a shattered mind. I scrubbed some more, and did a bit of patchwork the first week. The air clung thick, the room stale like no breathing human had ever entered within them in years, but it seemed somehow charming, as if the house was waiting for me to get there. That illusion was shattered in week 2, when I began to see things that did not make sense. It was insidious at first, disappearing things, doors I had closed opening up at night, and that creeping sense of being watched. I wrote it off as fatigue and went on. And then there was the scratching, first light like a mouse in the walls, but obviously intentional. Each evening, I would hear it groaning in creaks under the floorboards out in the hall. It began at dusk and ceased right at sunrise. The rhythm was too deliberate, too aware. I recall lying in bed in the dark, my heart pounding to the beat, not knowing if the beat was within the house or within my mind. I went down into the basement a few times by flash and sheer determination, but it was always empty. Empty, that is, with the suffocating darkness and the weak, lingering scent of wet soil. The walls were shattered, the concrete sodden and rotting, but there was no sign of infestation, no bugs, no rodents, nothing. I deluded myself and deceived myself into believing it was just the house settling. I said to myself that it was my imagination playing tricks on me. But after pacing up and down the corridor one night wide awake on the 13th night, I trod on something unusual on the floor. The hollow sound had no hard wood sound to it but the ring of void space. I looked closely at the floor. Under the dust and the warped boards almost beyond view was a seam, a square form. It was a trap door. It was not written in the house's documents. No hinges, no handle. A mere outline, worn by the weather and concealed like a healed wound. I should have returned. I should have locked it and left that accursed house behind. But human curiosity is a cruel master, and mine was starving to be fed. It took me 60 minutes before I could pry it open. Below was a rusty iron ladder leading into the darkness, a shaft of vertical plunge. Below was the sound of rushing air escaping, colder than ice and full of the smell of dirt, decay, and something far fouler. Something with a reek of decay seasoned by centuries of mildew. I hesitated, then went down. The rungs groaned beneath each step, echoing through the tube like a dirge. At 10 or so meters, my feet landed on solid rock. My light shone down a thin corridor, dug out of the rock itself. Walls slick with a mixture of etched pictures I couldn't decipher. Faces, shapes, and beasts cut out in their paint. Some man, some beast, a few. Neither. The passage curved around downward in a spiral, and the gradient was gradual and tiring. Below me, I was standing in front of a door, gigantic, wood and iron-studded. No handle, no keyhole, but a lone motto in Latin: Quod sub terra est, manere debet. What is below must stay there. I should have run. I should have plugged in that accursed door and closed the gap. But I didn't. The desire to see, to know, outweighed every survival mechanism. I touched the door. It creaked open with a spine-tingling ease. The next room was vast and circular. The walls contained the same scarring I'd seen in the hallway, but fresh and freshly cut, like newly completed. At its center was a stone table, a ritual altar, I assumed, splattered black with whatever I was too afraid to describe. Around it were items arranged ritually: bones, feathers, tiny vials of dried-out organs, and worn-down coins shattered by time. And then I saw it. There was commotion at the back of the room. It did not stir. It shifted like it was stone and fog. It was enormous, too tall to be real, its form sheathed in a rolling, heavy mist that seemed to consume light. It possessed no face that anyone could discern, only a shifting silhouette, beast, man, something else. Its existence was crushing. My mind was screaming, every molecule in my being begging me to flee, but I was immobilized, entrapped by terror beyond understanding. The thing was silent. It never came near. It just sat there, or, well, it knew. A knowledge as old as dirt, as cold as space, and it burned me. I do not know why I do know this. I just do know that afterward, I was not alone. I shut the trap door. I set off from the house the next day, taking all with me. But the present stayed behind. It intruded upon my dreams, created mirrors, windows to terrors, and walls exhale life which breathed in darkness. Wherever I went, apartment, hotel, friend's house, it was there. At first, little things, feeling watched, cold spots, missing things. Then the scratches returned. Always at midnight. Always under the floor. I visited priests, psychologists, and ghost hunters. None could help me. Some called me crazy. Others simply wouldn't take part. One of the priests was an old priest with shaking hands, and he wept when he listened to me and pleaded with me to leave. Some things are not meant to awaken, he told me. Some places are not meant to be touched. The hallucinations began soon after. Faces in windows, bodies propped against corners, messages written in condensation on glass. You opened the gate. You were seen. It waits. I do not sleep. I eat sparingly. I am a recluse, barricaded in walled apartments with no basements, no floorboards, no shadows that are not man-made. And yet, it comes. There are nights when I feel the trapdoor creakingly open on my sleep. The creaking ladder, the creeping presence, inch by inch. I realize now that the house hadn't been abandoned because it was run down or financially strained, but because it had simply never been intended to be. It hadn't been a house. It had been a window, a seal which I unknowingly broke. I tell you this to you not so that you will forgive. I am comfortable with my fate. I know of no ritual, no ceremony, no priest, no physician, which ever can undo what has been done. But if you read these words, if you ever hear the scratching in the walls, especially after the finding of what was not meant to be there, flee. Don't go out. Don't hang around. Don't listen. Don't look. Run and pray that it has not touched you. For it will never forget your name once it has learned it. Once it sees you, it will never avert its eyes.